A good while before the Machaeros, this is this fortress where John the Baptist is ultimately going to be killed on the other side of the Dead Sea in Jordan. I have a picture of that in my books, which was subject to her father. And so all things were necessary for her journey because Aretas, the Arab king, had control of those areas, I think, were made ready for her by the general of Aretas' army, and by that means she soon came to Arabia and went home to her father. Under the conduct of several generals who carried her from one to another successfully, and she soon came to her father and told him of Herod's intention. So Aretas made this the occasion of enmity between him and Herod, who had also some quarrel with him about the limits of the country and Gamalitis, wherever they are. Anyway, so both prepared for war and sent their generals to fight instead of themselves, and when they had joined the battle, all Herod's army was destroyed by the treachery of some fugitives, who, though they were of the tetrarchy of Philip, joined with Aretas' army. So Philip's guys liked the Arab army side. So Herod wrote about these affairs to Tiberius. He's the emperor, who being very angry. So this is in the late 30s, after Jesus is come and gone, it would seem, if we can date Jesus in this context at all. Because Tiberius doesn't come into power. So this is, you see, Josephus is going to place John the Baptist in the late 30s. Very, you say, well, that doesn't agree with the Gospels. You know, something's got to give. You'll have to decide which has to give. I hope I'm not boring. Can I read the rest of this? Do you mind? I know it's hard to understand, but anyway, this is the late 30s, mid to late 30s, because Tiberius doesn't come into power until about 37 AD. No, pardon me, I'm wrong. That's the other one comes into power in 37. I think Tiberius dies in 37, so it's before 37. I apologize. We don't know exactly when it is yet. It isn't made clear that it's the late 30s, because Tiberius is still alive, so he dies in 37, so it's somewhere before the late 30s. Okay, so we may not have a problem dating here. It's so confusing to me that I'm confused reading it. So Herod wrote about these affairs to Tiberius, who, being very angry at the attempt made by Aretas, wrote to the governor of Syria, Vitellius, to make war upon him, and either to take him alive and bring him to him in bonds, or to kill him and send him his head. There's the thing about his head, sending him his head. But it isn't John the Baptist's head. I think that's where the New Testament gets the head of John the Baptist on a platter theme from. It's the head of Aretas that they want. The foreign general who's opposing the Roman armies. Am I making any sense? I hope so. I hope they'll get clearer. This was the charge Tiberius gave the governor of Syria. Now, some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod's army came from God, and that very justly as a punishment for what he had done against John, who was called the Baptist. For Herod slew him, even though he was a good man, and commanded the Jews to exercise righteousness, to exercise virtue, both as righteousness towards one another. What's righteousness towards one another, as I've told you? Loving your fellow man. And piety towards God. What's piety towards God? Loving God, the two love commandments. So John taught the same two things that the New Testament says Jesus taught. And that Josephus says the Essenes taught. Piety towards God, the Essene commandments, all their purity regulations. Bathing and food and all that sort of thing. Righteousness towards your fellow man, how you treat your fellow man in a just manner, in a righteous manner. Summed up supposedly by the two love commandments. So there we are now. Here is actually a continuous then chain of using this piety righteousness ideology to describe these people's doctrines. I put them all in the same sort of transmission sort of. That's why development. That's why I would say that these are all basically Essene type individuals. People say, was John an Essene? Yeah, basically. How did he differ from Essenes? Well, you'd have to tell me how he differed from Essenes. I don't see there's any difference at all. And if Essenes are the doctrines that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, then he's basically the same ethos, almost exactly. Okay. And so to come to baptism. Okay, we have the baptism theme. That's in the New Testament. That's where we part company. Look at how Josephus puts the baptism theme. And so to come to baptism, for that the washing or immersion in water would be acceptable to God if they made use of it, not in order for the remission of sins. That's just the opposite of the New Testament. And John taught remission of sins in the wilderness. No, that's not what he taught, according to Josephus. It's just the opposite, that they did not make use of baptism for remission of sins, but for the purification of the body, rather. For the purification of the body, so that you could then get maybe remission of sins. In other words, baptism is an immersion to get rid of bodily uncleanness, which was what the Essenes were using for. This is a very precise definition, you see, way beyond what we get in other contexts. So I would say this is what a native Palestinian document would look like, even though Josephus is a wretched person. And still has information, you know, to put him into a courtroom, and even wretched people can give good testimony in a courtroom. So I think this is what, and the other documents sometimes are what overseas people might make of it. That is, it may not be with the same precision, and they may get some of the things, you know, a little bit, you know, how they would think it should be, but maybe not how it actually was. So it was not for remission of sins. It was for purification of the body, which makes sense. What are you going to water for? To wash your body, but not out of sins, out of uncleanness. The sin part comes later. Now, when and here's the sin part. Providing that the soul had thoroughly been purified beforehand by the practice of righteousness. It was or it comes earlier if you want. It was the practice of righteousness that purified your soul of sin. Baptism is only the last step, getting rid of the bodily impurities that you may have contracted. And you say, well, what bodily impurities? Well, these people believed there were bodily impurities of various kinds, getting near dead people, sleeping with women, any sexual act, can I be more specific? Wet dreams, I don't care what sort of thing it may be. You know, that was all led to your bodily impurity. Contact with other people who were had bodily impurities. You know, they were very big on purity. Okay, so the soul had to be purified beforehand by the practice of righteousness. Well, to me, does that make sense to you? I mean, to me, that makes like total sense. So that's why I mean, this is a less flamboyant